Were you wondering why your fuel prices again shot up last week? Well, it may be something to do with the fact that missiles fired from Yemen from the group known as the Houthis or Ansar Allah struck Saudi Aramco facilities.
Fires burned through the night following an attack on Saudi Aramco oil refineries and storage facilities.
Well, you probably wouldn't know anything about it if you were watching Western media because they dropped the story pretty much as soon as it happened, despite the fact that this was one of the largest strikes on Saudi Aramco facilities in years and really represents a massive escalation in the war on Yemen. A war, by the way, that just coincidentally happens to be a war that the United Kingdom and the US are directly involved in.
The coalition says the Iran-backed rebels struck Jeddah and another facility in Jazan to try and impact the nerve center of the world economy.
And really, this war in Yemen, which started in 2015, is the worst war in the world in terms of the sheer death and destruction and starvation which has come as a result of it.
The war between the Iran-aligned Houthi group and a coalition led by Saudi Arabia has entered its 8th year, 19 million reliant on food assistance.
But you wouldn't know that if you were watching Western television because the war is barely ever mentioned. It's barely mentioned that the United States and Britain have actively participated in this war, let alone that airstrikes from the United States have been committed in Yemen recently, after the Biden administration said that it would make it a top priority to end this conflict, but then sold Saudi Arabia hundreds of millions of more weapons.
The Senate on Tuesday handily defeated an effort to prohibit the sale of 280 advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles, missile launchers, and other weapons in support to Saudi Arabia.
But what you really need to know about this war is that around 400,000 people in Yemen have been killed as a result of it, and the blockade which has been placed upon the people of Yemen by Saudi Arabia and its allies. Not only this, but also almost 20 million people are currently going hungry in Yemen, and 160,000, according to UN statistics, are living in famine-like conditions. Millions of children are on the brink of absolute starvation. In addition to this, cholera is rampant in Yemen, amongst other diseases which have been weaponized, it is argued, by the Saudi-led coalition against the people of Yemen in order to put pressure on their opposition, which is the Houthis.
The war is now in its 8th year. The UN says it has killed more children under the age of 5 than combatants on the battlefield.
But the significance of the war in Yemen is not limited to the human suffering, and this is the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, according to the United Nations, but also affects the political and the global economy. For instance, when these strikes are launched against Saudi Arabia and its Aramco facilities, it has a massive impact on oil prices. In addition to that, earlier in this year, the Houthis launched strikes against the UAE and hit vital infrastructure there, sending a strong message to them, another massive oil-producing state. And now the Houthis or Ansar Allah movement are threatening to perhaps strike Israel if they get further involved in the conflict, and it looks like their missiles and munitions can reach Israel.
Whenever they hit targets that either in Saudi Arabia or the UAE, it's a hit against tourism in these countries.
And really, it is the fact that the Biden administration and also the UK government, which is supplying the bulk of the weapons to Saudi Arabia and its allies to bomb Yemen, are doing pretty much everything you would not do if you wanted to end the war.
President Biden said he would change the Trump policy of supporting Saudi's war in Yemen. But it's not all that apparent that policy has changed. We commissioned these weapons, and we should not give them to countries who are starving children and are committing essentially genocide in Yemen.
And as a result of them not pushing to stop this war, which really, if their weapons stop flowing to the Saudi-led coalition, if they stop participating with logistical support and their own airstrikes, and threaten Saudi Arabia and its allies with perhaps sanctions or some sort of punishment, would end in a few days or perhaps weeks. More realistically, however, they could try to bring the two sides, that is the Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition, to the negotiating table to properly negotiate a true ceasefire or perhaps put some sort of even-handed peace proposal on the table. But none of this has been done, and it is costing the United States and Britain dearly, especially as other crises are ongoing in the world which dramatically affects them, and this war which they're participating fighting in only drags them down and delegitimizes them in the eyes of their Gulf allies.